Hi, it's Mrs. Slusher from the Early Learning Village, and I have already made another video that I hope that you may have watched already about just some background about what I do and who I am, and our intervention team at the Early Learning Village. But now I want to share with you some things that are very specific to math and what we do in Tier 3 math interventions. So if you have a child that comes to work with myself or my fellow interventionist, Molly Irwin, Mary Miles, and our specials team as well, Miss Miller, Miss Davidson, Miss Jessie, Coach Adkins, or Susan Straight. We're all using some pretty common strategies and common tools to work on math with your kids. So I wanted to share a few of them with you. These are things that you may have at your house or that you could easily make at your house if you don't have them already. The goal is not really having very fancy high-tech stuff so much as it is just the work that you do with what you have. So I want to just encourage you that even if you don't have a lot of tools at your house, there are a lot of really easy, simple ways that you can still work on math with your children and help them be successful. So something that I use every day are just number flashcards. I have a set with teen numbers, and then I have a set with numbers 0 through 10. And those are used in so many different ways. I just literally made them on index cards. My teen numbers, I did do something a little bit differently. I made all of the ones in the teen numbers a different color, just to kind of bring out the fact that numbers in the teens, they start with a 1. There's a really fun song on YouTube called, I think it's called Numbers in the Teens. It's by a guy named Harry Kindergarten. But it's a really fun song, and it's just like reinforcing the fact that anytime you have a teen number, it's going to start with a 1. So I made my ones all the same color on my flashcards and did the ones place a different color just to sort of visually emphasize that, oh, they all start with a 1 if they're in the teens. So number flashcards are really easy thing for you to make at home. You could just write them on a piece of paper and cut them out. If you've got cardstock, great. If you've got flashcards already made, use those. You don't have to make something new. Just having flashcards is a helpful tool. Another thing that we do a lot when we have our kids in interventions is sequencing numbers or putting them in order. So there's lots of ways you can do this. So I use a few different strategies. One way, I just put the numbers on popsicle sticks, and then they have to put them in order from smallest to biggest. So I would say, okay, our first number is 1. What comes after 1? And then they have to find the 2. And then say, what comes next? 1, 2, and then they're going to look for 3. And then they're going to go all the way up to 10 being the last number. If your child already knows their numbers to 10, which most of our students do at this point, then it's very easily adapted to be for your teen numbers. So you could make popsicle sticks that start with 11 and go all the way to 20. This is a really important concept just because it helps our kids understand like the sequence of numbers, and it helps them get really good at saying the numbers in order. It's also a really great way for us to practice backwards counting. Once your child has put all of the numbers in order and they've practiced, obviously, forwards counting from smallest to biggest, a really great thing for you to have them do is to count backwards. So have them start at 10 and then go all the way back to 1. So practice touching the number 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. They're practicing saying those numbers backwards, but they're also practicing it while they look at the number, which is helping them more learn what the numbers are. And it's also helping them with counting in some ways because they're practicing moving 1 at a time and saying 1 number at a time. That's a really hard skill for a lot of our kindergartners, and so any way that you can practice that is awesome. This way, it practices lots of skills in one activity, which is why I like to do it in intervention. I've got other strategies that I use for number ordering. I found these online, but it's like a puzzle where they have the numbers and they put them together, and when they're in the correct order, it makes a picture. So that's another easy thing, if you can find those number puzzles online, I'll see if I can find those and find a way to share that with you. If you have printing capability at your house or you want to make those, you could. Another important skill that we practice a lot in Tier 3 math is counting to 100. This is a kindergarten standard, so we expect that all of our kindergartners by the end of the year will be counting to 100 by ones. So what I always encourage my students to do is to practice counting to 100 by ones. So we use our hundreds chart for this. The more senses that we can use, the better when we practice these skills. So when my kiddos count, we practice it a few different ways, but this way is a really important way to try to start out with this, because first of all, it's reinforcing, like when I say one is this thing right here. This symbol right here is 1. When I say 2, that means this symbol. When I say 3, it means this, and so on and so forth. It also helps keep them focused, because sometimes our students, when they're counting, they get to these teen numbers, especially 13, 14, 15, 16, and the sounds get all jumbled up in their mouths. It just happens. So when they have the numbers in front of them and they're touching one at a time, it's easier for them to stay focused and to remember to slow down and say those numbers the correct way. So when we practice counting, sometimes I will say, for example, if I have a student who was able to count to 29 1 week, I would say, okay, we're going to set our goal. So last week we were able to count all the way to 29. We're going to set a goal and get all the way to 40. If your child is struggling to even get to 50 or 60, then set a short-term goal. I told all of my kids in the last few weeks, like when we go to eat a cheeseburger, we don't eat the whole cheeseburger at one time. We take it one bite at a time. So this whole hundreds chart is like a cheeseburger. We can't eat the whole thing at one time. We're going to set little goals, little bites to get to our goal of 100. So if your child can get to 29, then maybe set their goal for 40 and say, we're going to go all the way to 40 today. And then tomorrow we're going to go to 45, and then just keep adding on and making that goal bigger and bigger until they're comfortable and confident. Another thing I use with my students with this hundreds chart when counting, I do not always start them at 1 or 0. I make them start on 14, especially if your child is able to count up into these bigger numbers like in the 80s and 90s. Sometimes you may not want to start all the way at 1. You might want to say, let's just start at 25 and keep going. That's a really important skill, because with counting, we know that kids can often memorize that pattern of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But if you say start on 5 and keep going, well, if they can't do that, then they don't really know all there is to know about counting. They just know you have to start at 1. So having them practice starting on different numbers really makes their counting skills a lot stronger and more fluent and ready for first grade. Another thing I have my students do, we count by ones all the way to our goal, or to 100, whichever it is. But we also pick a number between 30 and 10, and we count backwards all the way to 1. Backwards counting is one of our kindergarten math standards, and so the goal by the end of the year is that students can start at 30 and count backwards all the way to 1. So for a lot of our students that we work with in Tier 3, we may choose like 15, and that's our goal. And then once we're really good at 15 backwards to 0, then we might bump it to 20, go backwards to 0, and then 25, and build our way up to the goal, which is counting backwards from 30. The last thing I use this hundreds chart for is to count by tens all the way to 100, which is another one of our kindergarten math standards. So we start at 10 and we count by tens all the way to 100. This is important for a lot of reasons. It's not just about counting by tens. When our students are counting, a lot of times kindergartners have a really hard time going from this 9 number to the tens place. So when you get to 19, a lot of our kids will freeze and they're like, I don't know what comes after 19. Oh, it's 20. Or they'll get stuck on 59 and not remember that when you go from 59, the next number is 60. We call it crossing the decade because you're adding another 10 to the tens place. So that's what we mean when we say crossing the decade. And counting by tens is a good way to help them practice saying the next decade numbers in sequence. So after the 20s, 30, 40, 50. After the 50s come the 60s. After the 60s come the 70s. So count by ones. Don't always start at 1 and set goals. Count backwards. Again, 30 is the highest you would want them to go. And also practice counting by tens on this. Another fun way to practice counting to 100 is I have this lovely hacky sack that I'm pretty sure I got in my Christmas stocking a couple years ago. You can use any ball that you have at home. Roll it, throw it, toss it, however you want to play. But I will practice counting to 100 with my kids by the person with the ball says the next number. So I'll start it, and maybe I'll start on 15. So I'll say 15, and then I'll toss it or roll it to a student. When they get it, they have to say the number that comes next. So they'll say 16, and they'll throw it back to me. 17, 18, and then they'll throw it back 19, and then we'll go all the way. This is a great time when you have a student who's stuck going from one number to the next. If I have a student who's stuck on 29, they can't get past 29. They go 29 and 50. Well, when we come to 29, I might say 29, and then they say, I'll say it's 30. Say 30, and then they say 30. They roll it back. I'll say 29, and then the kid has to practice saying 30. And we do that a couple of times just so they get in the habit of saying the number that comes after the number they're stuck on.